Ready?
All right, let's start it off. Peace, family. You're tuning into the Pro-Black Perspective on KWAZ Radio. Today we have a special ghost and a moderator. We have none other than Boukman, a Pan-Africanist of great esteem. And then, of course, you also have Azikiwe. He's going to moderate this, and you know he's a good brother as well. The topic for today is which African spirituality will unite us? And it will be a debate with me and Boukman. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to the moderator, and he could tell you how everything's going to go through.
All right, welcome. So the format of this debate, I will present the debaters 3 questions each for a total of 6 questions. And when I give them the questions, they'll have 3 minutes to give a response. And then the other debater will have 2 minutes to rebuttal. And then after we finish our course of questions, we'll go to the audience to get audience interaction from there.
All right. And what about, how much time do we have for this opening statement? And when do you
for this opening statement, we have about 3 to 4 minutes to give your opening statement for each debater. And only you may begin.
All right. So here's my position today. All right. I'm going to tell you guys, I'm going to demonstrate to you that African spirituality is a necessary tool. That ancient African spirituality is a necessary tool for the unity of Africa. And I want to demonstrate this first by opening up this book right here, Yurugu, page 110. We're going to see what religion is, and by seeing what religion is and what, for instance, what spiritual systems are, we're going to demonstrate that only the ancient African spiritual system can deliver that unity that we need, right? So on page 110, we see that Marimba Ani says religion refers to the formalization of ritual, dogma, and belief, leading to a systematic statement of syntactically supranational tenets, and may or may not issue from a spiritual conception of the universe. Most often, it functions to sacralize a nationalistic ideology. So you have there that religion sacralizes a nationalistic ideology, and this is going to be something very critical and very important for us as a people when we consider what the contemporary groups in Africa today represent. So in order to do that, we're going to bring out Destruction of Black Civilization and turn to page 46, right? And I'm only rushing because I'm pressed for time, right? But in Destruction of Black Civilization, on the top of page 46, this is the 3rd edition, Chancellor Williams says, it was for reasons of security that so many of these groups, later called tribes or societies, sought the most hidden and isolated areas they could find. This permanent separation from their kinsmen and other groups were generally quite contrary to their heart's desires. The original splintering off and parting was often done in tears, but breaking up into smaller units seemed to be the only route to survival in a permanent crisis situation. Apparently permanent, since the movement of people over the continent had been going on so far beyond the memory of each generation that migrations and temporary settlements were among the most significant facts in the oral traditions of each society. Fragmentation and isolation had 2 momentous consequences. The first was that the isolation of various groups led to the development of over 2,000 different dialects and languages. The second fateful outcome was that for the rise of all the tongues widened the gulf between the blacks that territorial distances have already achieved. One should pause here for reflection if there's any serious attempt to really understand what happens to the African people and why. For even without the aid of Western writers and emphasizing the language differences and the cultural variations and attempting to show how unrelated the blacks were, they in time came to consider themselves unique with each society, not only independent of the other, but suspicion became an African way of life. Small chiefdoms sprang up everywhere, often no more than a village of 100 or 200 people. Africa therefore presented itself to Asia and Europe as the ideal land for exploitation, enslavement, and conquest. What he's saying, in short, is that these belief systems, the belief systems of the contemporary Africa today, represent how we, our own self-division, and we now put ourselves, when we use these different contemporary systems, as a divided people, and we cannot achieve unity in that way. So we must go back to ancient African spiritual system. And if you open up this book from my favorite author, you already know, the Book of Power, page 122, right? You'll see that I explain to us what our ancient faith was and how we use this ancient faith even back in Kemet to unite ourselves in black unity. So I wrote down Waset, the city of Was, the city of power, was the center of dynastic Nile Valley education, and the focus there was the old ways, the ways that binded us long ago. In the Greens Sahara, for thousands of years, Africans worshipped Amun. In Waset, thousands of years later, Africans worshipped Amun. Further south, as early as Tasseti, the first established kingship and diaspora of the Maya Confederation, Africans worshipped Amun. Even today, all throughout Africa, through the names vary between different nations, Africans worship Amun. We were known as Ammonians in the ancient world because Africans worshipped Amun. The message is clear. Africans worship Amun. However, with the loss of the Waset, the perfect worship of Amun needs to be rediscovered, but a major lesson survives. So I can eventually show you why this ancient faith is superior. I intend to illustrate that, but I might be pressed for time. I can't tell.
You are.
If the brother gives me 30-second notification, but maybe I'm done. So that is what I intend to show throughout this demonstration, and I hope, and that's what it is. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Amma.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, absolutely, no problem.
So, I believe that the root of this debate topic we've chosen is actually a false dichotomy. That there is this gulf between, or this sort of impregnable gulf between ancient African spirituality and contemporary systems that evolved after Africans were scattered throughout the continent is actually false. And what we can demonstrate is that even as people have traveled throughout the continent, and I would maintain as they have traveled in the diaspora in the post-slave era, they have maintained critical elements of that ancient spirituality. And for now, I am going to read from the Encyclopedia of African Religion to just give you one tidbit of that, and that's just one aspect. There are others. So he says here, consider the fact that in Benin, Mawu Lisa of the Fan appear in the representation as a joint deity, with Lisa holding the sun disk in his mouth and Mawu carrying the crescent moon. In various places in the Nile Valley, one can see representation of this symbolism, but it is not only a classic African form, but we can also see it in other regions of the continent. So there are important elements of the religion of Kemet that are spread as people migrate. And so to disparage contemporary African spirituality as being inferior or some kind of detracting from Kemetic religion, I think is false. I also think we need to keep our eye on the ball, even though this is not the debate topic that we're here to discuss today. And that is, what is the essential disunifying spiritual force on the African continent? And I would say that it is no African spirituality, but rather the Eurasian invader religions that have distorted the African spiritual systems that they have borrowed from. And so let's take a quick look at one of the obvious elements of this. Within the imagery of the divine Kemet, you have a father, mother, son imagery, which is a triad. Within what has become Christianity, we have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is also a triad, but it is a triad derived of an essential element, which is the gender balanced feminine energy that has always been a critical component of African spirituality. It is very odd that often we say that it's, they who have brought in a homophobic element, or some people say that they've brought in a homophobic element, but the sort of celebration of homophilia, I should say, by removing the feminine energy, comes from the Eurasian religion itself. And this is my third point. I don't know how much time do I have, but for me, this is a pragmatic question and not a question of, essential, essential value, as I think that the values are actually fairly close. And I'm going to illustrate that by telling you a quick story. Recently, somebody was asking, are there people in the diaspora who actually connect and share a Yoruba identity, who worship like us? And I happen to have a really beautiful video of a festival going on in Brazil, where not only they were celebrating it, and they were doing it in an incredibly elaborate way that they have I'm sorry?
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
Okay. 30 seconds. All right. So, because I was able to show him that, what he actually immediately felt at that moment was this kinship with people across the diaspora, which I would not have been able to do if I had illustrated, if I had some example of somebody celebrating Kemetic religion with names that he doesn't recognize and with practices that, although are related, seem unfamiliar. That's it.
All right, that's wonderful open statements from two of you. This is great. This is great. All right. Now we will enter the questioning. And Oni, the first question that I have for you is in regards to ancient African spirituality and its tenets and what it does for us. How is this going to be beneficial for us when it hasn't helped us since the time of the ancient period to now?
Okay, not a bad question. So, luckily, that what I wanted to demonstrate to you, everybody, is of course the superiority, if you will, of the ancient African faith. And by superiority, I really mean the purity. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reopen Chancer Williams, but this time I'm going to open it to page 129 because this page kind of, in two ways, speaks to the issue at hand. The first one, the first paragraph is, it has been noted that the attractions of Ethiopia, the land of the gods, were great not only because the Egyptians regarded it as the main source of their religion, but also because of its socio-political, economic, and strategic importance. When African kings reconquered Egypt and became Egyptian pharaohs, they still longed for the motherland to the south, desiring to unite the whole of it with Egypt in one vast empire. They would often retire there, some wanting their final resting place to be in the pyramid below the first cataract. To the south rested their ancestors whose company they were to join. Here was the capital city of both the black man's world and that of his heaven, as well as the holy city of Napata. I will jump a little bit lower on that same page, and he says, earlier you may recall I was unsparing in my criticism of the African societies, which seem to be governed by fatalism and failed to counterattack against their natural and human enemies. As I read the record, it seemed to me that these groups did not try to meet the awful challenges which confronted them. They gave up too readily and refused to ignore tribal lines or to unite for common survival strategies. They remained scattered here and there like hunted animals, moving into barbarism and savagery. Such were my strictures, and obviously I did not give the whole story even about these groups. But he says, now, however, and by a glorious contrast, we are in the midst of the blacks, the core group of all of Africa, who met the challenge on all fronts and from every direction, and who fought on and on through the centuries against the forces of man and nature until they themselves were completely overwhelmed. That's the story of these ancient African spiritual systems, that not only do they esteem purely and truly ancient Africa and black and the South and all that, but they also were the most efficient at fighting our enemies. Now, did they eventually lose against this mass horde of Eurasians? Of course, right? But they were the strongest opponents to these Eurasians, and their civilization lasted 5,000 plus years, longer than any civilization of anyone today, and longer than any civilization since. So that is one of the reasons why you would study them, because even though they may not have been victorious, they had the best shot, and the only reason why they lost, and why they lost was very complicated, but it's a low loss. It's a loss that we can study from more so than we can study from the losses of us, because the losses that we have today, 20 seconds. The losses that we have today are because of our division. The victories we had yesterday were because of our unity under a spiritual system of ancient African spirituality. Thank you, sir.
All right. You have a rebuttal for this?
I'm sorry, did you say?
Do you have any retort to what Oni has laid out?
All right. So I'm not quite sure that you have identified specifically that their system itself was either why they lost or why they won. That I understand that there was this long period, and we should all look back to it. But as you mentioned, there are a myriad of reasons, and it's complicated. And it's not clear to us that this was the thing that maintained them. Now, perhaps that is true, but you should, elaborate on that a little bit more. I would point out a piece of data, which is this diversity we see now in African spiritual systems throughout the continent existed in Kemet. And I'll go back to the encyclopedia where they talk about the 42 gnomes that existed in pre-dynastic Kemet, where there were different names and different ways of expression. What one could see, and that was how that diversity was not division. And perhaps if we can also identify, which I'd like an opportunity later on to show that this diversity is not division, we could see that this is not the cause of our fall or disunity.
Okay. Do you see your time? Tell me you see your time.
That's my answer. I'm having a hard time, it's hard to keep up with the time of talk, so that's my answer.
Okay. You have 4 more seconds if you wanted, but okay. Do you have anything to say about that, Oni?
We doing rebut?
If you have anything to
all right, sure. Yeah. Okay, so was the spiritual system the reason? How much time do I have for that?
Yeah, 42 seconds, sir.
All right, well, the spiritual system was the reason. I'll try to show you eventually that, yes, when we go back to what I said about Urugu and the sacralizing the nationalistic ideology, you'll see that contrast to contemporary spiritual systems, the ancient African spiritual systems were more so about, black unity, black power, black, as opposed to
15 seconds.
Today. All right. But we can go into that later. I see the rest of the time.
Okay, all right. So the next question will be for Anna. All right. Generally speaking, how can we foster an African unity or Pan-African unity by following multiple religions and multiple beliefs?
By demonstrating that there are multiple expressions of a common spiritual system. So a while ago, I did this Twitter lesson, which I do sometimes over the weekend, where I compared the Ifa spiritual system to the Afa divination that is done by the Igbo. And if you look at it, you'll see, they use different names, they use different words, but there are common important spirituality, including the process of divination, including the belief in one omnipotent deity who is all-powerful and beyond all comprehension, a deity who has created intermediaries between that deity and humanity. A central element is veneration of the ancestors and their important role. An essential element throughout the continent is how we sacralize nature, bodies of water, trees, and how that common understanding has helped us to preserve the environment much better before the Eurasian invasion. So I would say the way we go about tackling that. Another one is balance, and I think this is important, right? So we don't find 3 male figures within African spirituality. We find a plurality of male and female religions, male and female sacred expressions, and roles that empower both men and women. And so I think if people just talk about that and say, oh, you have this, I have this. But also, this isn't the dividing thing. People are arguing about French versus English in Cameroon. They're arguing about Islam versus Christianity in Nigeria. They're having all sorts of divisions. I can't think of a war that has occurred because one person was practicing Ifa and the other one was doing Afa. That's not happening. So the question is based on a false premise.
You see your time?
And I would also say it's a European problem, right? Europeans fight about their religion. Europeans went to war and killed each other over religion. We have not. And to place that burden on African is completely foreign and unfair.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we do have issues just amongst nations of groups, whether it's Yoruba, Igbo, House of Fulani, for example, as well.
Unrelated to religion. And they have not, that has not been the point of contention. And when now in places in Africa where we practice the exact same religion, we have Christians who are fighting each other over French and English and all sorts of other things. The source of the division is the initial invasion into the continent and the divide that Oni talks about. There are great books out there and research materials that shows how the slave trade created an environment of distress and fear, a legitimate one that also created division. If potentially another black person could be selling you into slavery, that is a reason to fear. That is a reason to mark your body, to identify yourself with a particular tribe so that I know this mark means you are this and you are not a threat to me, or you are potentially a threat to me. It is the external sources that are the source of our division, not African spiritual systems.
All right. That was 30 more seconds, so I'll give you 30 more seconds for your rebuttal only. That'll be 2 minutes and 30 seconds starting now.
All right, thank you. What she mentioned was that, for instance, African people have a common spiritual system. And the reason why we have a common spiritual system is because of ancient Africa. This is why you would go back to ancient Africa, because if you go right now to the uncommon spiritual systems, then you have that division. And I mean, the idea that there's no wars for any division, or any division or any ethnic groups, doesn't really correlate with this whole these people invaded and then we, as a divided people, became suspicious of our own people. It's because we were already divided with these little smaller groups that we then had that suspicion. That we had that suspicion and had the division, in the sense that even ancient Kemet was invaded. But instead of them turning on themselves and selling themselves into Arabia or wherever, they fought together as one people and fought the people as a united front. And that's exactly why we would do that. And Kemet itself looked back on their ancient traditions to do that. So if anybody knows about Taharka, that's exactly what Taharka does. I also want to demonstrate that one of the things about the faiths of today is that they're being corrupted. So these are two very good authoritative books, one on the Yoruba and one on the Akan. And I want to show at least two. Actually, I'm get a third book, and this is going to be a very authoritative book on Sunjata.
Yeah, 1 minute.
Okay, wow, okay. All right, so the long story short, when you open up this page, on page 94 to 95 and 96, they name the different Abasom in the Akan faith. And some of them want scotch, want cigarettes, want foreign imports. When you look at the handbook of Yoruba, you have some of them want tobacco. Tobacco, however, was introduced into Africa in the 16th century. This is the Orisha asking for tobacco. And when you look at Sunjata, you know that early on in page 21, that the Arab is central to the story of Sunjata. So what that means is that they are sacralizing, they are making sacred foreign imports, foreign imports and foreign people in their own spiritual systems. And by making those people sacred, what it will do is then it corrupts the whole basis of unity, because now they're going to fight. And if anybody knows about, for instance, in Lumumba will tell you in South Sudan, that the Nuer and the Dinka have reasons against each other. A lot of war all over Africa for almost no apparent reason, even though they're the same people. But it does go with what they sacralize, what their spiritual systems are. And thank you.
All right. Okay. All right. And so, do you have any rebuts to that, Amma?
Sure. Well, they're more in the form of questions. One, seems to me that you were implying that corruption of a thing implies that there's something inherently flawed about that thing, as opposed to the fact that it's been corrupted, which I would have assumed prior to today is simply a human frailty that happens to the best of us. So I would be interested in knowing, what is it about the Kemetic system that you think is above corruption? Is it not possible that they could be corruption there too under the right circumstances? We know, for example, that ancient time, one of the corruptions that occurred was a corruption we see today, which is it's a preference for people for marital unions between ourselves and people of white people of no color, Eurasians, and that brought about a weakening of the kingdom and the environment in those people, right? So they became internally divided. Is that not a form of corruption? And did not corruption not occur when they were practicing African spirituality?
I mean,
okay.
Okay. Is that a direct question? Do I answer that, moderator?
It is a direct question.
Well, I'm asking the moderator if I can answer that, because...
Yeah, you got a good. I'm gonna give you 27 seconds. Go ahead, bro.
27 seconds? Brother. Okay, so what I would say is that there are different faiths, like you outlined before, there are different faiths in ancient Kemet. One of them is in Waset. Waset would be the purest form of African spirituality. And no, they didn't have that miscegenation in Waset.
They are above corruption.
Above it. You know what I'm saying? They're above it.
Well, the question for the moderator, I would like to know what is it about that is above corruption.
Who are you asking me?
I would ask you to ask him since I can't ask him.
I'm not in the debate now. Okay. A lot of these questions we can tackle after we finish the main courses too.
Sure. You can write it down.
All right. So Oni, next question. We do see today a lot of people, especially if we talk about in the continental United States, a lot of people are being open and are choosing to learn more about Ifa, other African spirituality systems, and because of that, they're starting to grow in groups and relating back to their cultures. Would you say this is effective or a temporary solution to maybe a bigger problem of African unity?
Well, of course it's going to be, because one of the things that we have to notice about contemporary Africans is that, particularly if you look at Nigeria, which I'm sure you've probably seen before, right? But if you look at Nigeria, you understand that if you wanted to propose an official language, and I know Amma saw this today, that if you propose an official language, they'll be welcome to English, right? But they might not be welcome to Yoruba. They might not be welcome to Igbo as the sole official language. Why? Because you are going to be putting preference to one group over another group, right? Whereas if you want to be a unified people, if you want to practice unity, you have to go where there is a common unity, where there's a commonality. You unify around the commonality, and the commonality that we all have is we share an African heritage, an ancient African heritage. Right? Now some people can debate and say, oh, well, not this, there, not this, not. But Kemet has the record. Kemet shows that not only was it striving towards an ancient African heritage, but it is an ancient African heritage. So that would be our ancestors' spiritual systems. Right? Now, why would Ifa be considered a bit of on the divisionary part? Is that you will not be able to unite with us, Gosa or whatever, right? Azosa, if you do not, if you're coming to them as a Yoruba, right? But if you go to the Xhosa, or you go to the Dinka, or you go to the Igbo, or you go wherever as you're practicing a reconstructed faith, right? The reconstructed ancient faith, then you can have that unity the same way that the modern Euro Jews were able to reconstruct an ancient practice and across Europe, you know, Poland and wherever. Russia and America and Germany and wherever, they're able to reconstruct an ancient faith and then to be united in the country of Israel. We can do that. Is how people do it. That is how even Wazungu does it when he brings up Latin, and he brings Latin for a unity. That is how people unite. They come around a commonality, a common theme, and they don't put precedence over any one individual ethnic group. And instead, they go and see where we are all common, where we as a people are an African people. And because we know that monism is the African spiritual system that has been practiced from ancient times, right? It was ancient even in ancient Egypt, right? As we know that is the belief system of our people, and that's why we would do that. More so than going, oh, well, I'm going to do Yoruba. Because before you were Yoruba, you were ancient Kemet. You were of ancient Kemet. Or you were of Amun. Before you were a Yoruba. You're of Amun. Okay? And Kemet just adopted what they were doing, what we were doing, what our ancient African ancestors were doing even before that. I see my time.
No, that's on the 15 seconds. That's good. That's good. All right. Any rebuttal to this?
Yeah, so I want to be very clear that I'm in no way suggesting that people switch to a universal naming convention of calling the divine Olodumare as opposed to Mother Lisa, as opposed to the many various names that we have on the continent. I think that strength can be found in perceiving the unity within the diversity. I also think it is a false dichotomy and a Eurasian problem. Having said that, I want to address two specific things that he said. One about Israel. Israel did not reconstruct anything. There were scattered Jews all over Europe who had maintained an ancient practice in relatively untempered form, who were able to reconstruct that back when they moved to Israel. We're looking at something that's a little bit different. The Jews were small. They were surrounded by Christian, and what was Christianity and Judaism, were pretty clearly separate. You brought up the issue of Latin, and I actually think that that's a good one, but let's look at the time of the Renaissance, how Europeans dealt with their Dark Ages, right? So they went through this 1,000-year period, rough times. They really seemed to have forgotten the best of themselves, and therefore they went back to a time that they thought they had done better. Did they look at the Latin text? Yes. Did they review Homer? Did they read Plato? Yes. Did they jettison English, French, Spanish, or heck, even Christianity for the worship of Zeus? Absolutely not. They found inspiration from their antiquity while simultaneously realizing that they had been transformed linguistically and spiritually as a people within the 1600 so years between the time of the rise of Christianity and the Renaissance, and they did not simply forget that that time had happened and go back to become first century Romans.
All right. Almi, you have anything to say toward that?
Yeah, that was a nice quip first century Romans. I do want to say, I did want to talk about the Hebrew thing, but as far as the Latin thing, it's really important because when we talk about finding unity for our people, we have to understand that when we are looking for unity, we are looking for the intelligentsia class, right? The intellectual class to have a unity, first and foremost. And so whereas the Brits didn't jettison English and the French didn't jettison French, on the intellectual level, they did normalize and almost Latin was the dominant language for the intellectual class, to the point where that is how a white unity that was able to then conquer Africa came about. The fact that they were able to unite under the particular Latin faith and Latin religion, I don't know, I couldn't hear you, but the fact that they were able to unite under that Latin and that Latin faith, that is why they were able to unite and not just attack the world as British or attack the world as German or attack the world as French, but attack the world as white people. So if we are to address the world as black people, then of course we will have to go back and not necessarily be first century Egyptians, but we have to, as our intellectual level, have that kind of solidified, united intellectual level, and not just divided. The Europe, blah blah blah. Thank you, sir.
May I please respond to that?
Yeah, why not? Go ahead.
So,
10 seconds.
Around the time that you are speaking of, we have a Reformation in which Latin is the dominant language in the church. This is resoundingly rejected throughout Europe. An important thing that happens is that Europeans insist the Bible in their Mass must be performed in their vernacular language. They did not unite around Latin. They rejected the important works of the Renaissance. Yes, they go and they read Homer. But if you think about the philosophers who came out of the Renaissance into the Enlightenment, John Locke, Hobbes, Spinoza, Rousseau, they all wrote in their vernacular language. They did not use Latin. This is a mischaracterization of how they used their ancient past to build without neglecting the people that they had become over time.
I mean, I don't think I can respond, so I'm just gonna.
All right. Okay. All right. For the next question, I'll be asking you. Let me set up the timer. You did mention how we should not try to revert back or follow these Eurasian or Judeo-Christian religions that we were brought to from the Eurasian invasion. Correct?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I believe so, but yeah, go ahead.
Okay. However, if we know that the origins of these religions do come from our ancient belief systems and ancient stories, why can't we follow them as contemporary, as an African contemporary belief system?
Because I would say that they distort African notions of the sacred and the balance of the universe in important ways. So one of the ways that I brought up was gender balance within God itself. Another thing you might see, for example, let's look at some of the distortion takes place in Genesis. So in Genesis, you have humanity sort of being put over a dominant position over the world, as opposed to a humanity that sees the world as essentially sacred. You have the figure of the serpent as being wicked and demonic, which is where we get that. And throughout Africa, you don't see that. So there's duality in the Old Testament, where you can see how they are wrestling with the image of the serpent, for example. In the book of Exodus, the serpent is looked to for healing properties, which kind of represents one of the ways that the cleverness of the serpent is treated. And another instant, the serpent is evil. There is an Akan story that is very similar to the Tower of Babel, where humanity is trying to reach heaven, but humanity makes a mistake by pulling a block from underneath, and the thing collapses. So humanity doesn't reach heaven by its own difficulty, not because God is trying to stop humanity. Very different from the biblical story where God is somehow intimidated by humanity and needs to create confusion to stop this. So, we're limited in time, so the problem that it is a distortion of our spiritual system. Of course, with Christianity, you have this image of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed man who looks very much like your conqueror. This is problematic, and we see the consequences of that in the way that white people are put on a pedestal, elevated above all things African, and people reject themselves because they cannot see their own image in the image of the divine that they feed themselves on a weekly basis.
All right. Okay. So, Oni, do you have any rebut to that?
Well, I mean, I think that if we are to say, hey, let's dismiss let's dismiss this faith because blah blah blah, but our faiths are good for so on and so forth. We have to realize that all of the faiths in Africa are not identical, right? All of them are not identical, and some of them do have this patriarchy. Some of them do have this patrilinealism. Some of them do have this respect for the foreign. I just showed you the Akan have some of the Abasom and the Akan want tobacco or cigarettes. They want cigarettes and schnapps. In the Yoruba, some of the Orisha want tobacco. In Sunjata, the Arab, and the Muslim way is central. Islam is central in this particular empire. Now, if we were to say, hey, you know what, let's all leave everything the same, then you're going to have spiritual systems that are already, in fact, twisted and corrupted by these Eurasians, one. But on top of that, we also see that insofar as they were twisted, that a lot of them do have these have adopted certain ways that are against what we are doing or what we did as a people. So whereas Amma may point out, oh well, we have this duality, we have this complementarity, we have this balance between male and female. Many of Africa, most of Africa, a lot of Africa is polygamous right now. You understand? And that is seen as a fundamental and central practice in a lot of the spiritual systems, a lot of the ethnic groups of today. So if we are to really and truly go into something that might be an ideal sense of what is sacred, as in the balance between male and female, if that is sacred to us, then we have to go to a spiritual system that has that sacredness within it. But we do not find that universally across Africa. We find it here and there in hodgepodges, and what we identify it for is that it came from a common ideology, a common spiritual system, and that is what we would call ancient African spiritual systems, or Ammonism, if you will, or Ammonian. But the point being that particular worship, that particular spiritual system that has us as sacred, the one that Amma herself is esteeming, is the one that I'm saying is the part that will unite us. But if we do not put that as it, right, we are going to be divided, because we're going to have people who do not see that balance as being sacred. We're going to have people who see Arabs and Muslims as being sacred. We're going to have people who see schnapps and imported goods and foreign cars and vehicles as something that's sacred. And when you do that, you're not going to have unity. You're going to have division, because you cannot unite on that. Thank you, sir.
All right. Okay. Amma?
Oh, was that my initial question? I thought that was my question, and you beat Judy.
No. I was asking if you had any other responses.
No. We can move on to the next thing.
All right. Oni. We know historically the use and the belief in contemporary spiritual systems has been beneficial to us. A great example is the Haitian Revolution, and how their use of ancestral worship was effective in defeating the French, correct? Seeing how effective this was, and we have other examples, of course, historically, how can you remain adamant that the one way that we should go is to have a unified system of the ancient Kemetic spiritual system?
It's fascinating that you would bring up IT. I didn't even think to bring up IT, so that's a good question, right? IT, the Vodun from IT, we can trace back, some of us trace it back to Dahomey, right? Dahomey is considered one of the biggest slave trading societies in Africa. It's considered to be ravaging several different communities in Africa, including the Akan, the so on and so forth. Like they're all fighting, and basically what I'm saying is that same spiritual system that may have that definitely was helpful in IT. That same spiritual system was the spiritual system that was being used on the continent fervently, or being abused on the continent fervently by the French, in order to even get those people to Haiti. My issue is not so much to fight the oppressor after we leave Africa. My purpose is to fight the oppressor when he enters Africa, and that's what ancient Kemet has a record of. You understand? If we're fighting the oppressor in America, we're rejecting him. That's fine. You can reject him, but the point being is that we have to look for a unity that can last us for centuries, for eons. Ancient Kemet has a record of being united for eons. Dahomey lasted for a few hundred years. IT, it's still here, but it's only 100 years or 200 years old. You understand? What we're talking about is thousands of years, several dynasties, all of them, and so when we use that as an example of people going deep into the recesses of Africa in order to fight as a black united front, right? That is the kind of mentality. That's the kind of that's what's sacred to them. Esteeming and upholding Africa and black unity is what's sacred to them. If I had the time, I could eventually, hopefully, I could bring out wonderful Ethiopians. I don't know how much time, but this.
You got a minute.
I have a minute. All right, let's see if. Okay, here's the book. Right. We're gonna just try to jump into it right here, page 109. This is wonderful Ethiopians, one of the 3 best history books that you can read. And she starts off with Diodorus Siculus said of the work of the closing of Ethiopian dynasty that there were numerous canals built and embankments intended to keep the towns above the level of the Nile. That's brains. Hosea, king of Israel, sent presents to Shabaka. Amen-Eridus, his sister, was a woman of rare intelligence and superior merit. She was 3 times regent in Egypt under 3 sovereigns of the Ethiopian dynasties, showing the respect the Ethiopians had for womankind. Amen-Eridus was very popular at Thebes. Shabaka abolished capital punishment and substituted hard labor. At Luxor, he appears making offerings to the gods of Thebes as a native sovereign. Taharka, in 693, built the great temple of Gebel Barco. Many of the reliefs of the pyramids present the Ethiopian rulers as lord of the 2 lands with the throne titles Amen and Ra. They wear the same symbols upon their heads, Amen, Amen, Argneb, Ankh, Ka, Ra. We read those names, showing that for ages Nubia and Egypt were ruled as one land, ages far earlier than the period marked in the average history of the Ethiopian dynasties. I guess I'll see my time.
All right. Amma?
So, I'm glad you brought up the Haitian Revolution. I am from Haiti, if people who are watching do not know. So, thank you for that. And I added on my notes, and I forgot all about it. So, thank you for the reminder.
No problem.
So, one of the things we see in Haiti is a diversity of faiths coming together. So, there are elements that strongly represent the Dayome tradition, but there are also elements, including, for example, the Zombie. Which comes out of the Congo. What Africans did in Haiti is they saw the commonality between what had been done in West Africa and what had been done in Central Africa. And they said these are not things to divide over. And they also saw what the real intrusion into their faith was, which was this Eurasian element. And I feel the need to read Boukman Duty's prayer to you all, just because I want you to have heard it if you have not heard it before. The God who created the earth, who created this, gives us life, the God who holds the ocean, who makes the thunder roar, our God who has ears, you who are hidden in the clouds, who watch us from where you are. You see all that the white man has made us suffer. The white man's God asked him to commit crime, but the God within us asks us to do good. And I think the part about within us is important. I'm coming to that at that time or maybe later on. Our God, who is so good, so just, he orders us to avenge our wrong. It is he who will direct our arms and bring us to victory. It is he who will assist us. We should all throw away the image of the white man's God, who is so pitiless. Let us listen to the voice of liberty that speaks within our heart. This diversity and rejection are essential elements to what was successful in the Haitian Revolution. I want to quickly touch upon this point of corruption, which Oni brings up over and over again. So one of the things we find that is different in the story of Genesis as opposed to our story of what is the relationship between the divine and ourselves is in Genesis it's chaos. And God brings about the into that chaos. It's a very disempowering thing, and it causes you to, get on your knees and pray. It is we infused, according to African spirituality, with the divine, who are supposed to bring about an end to chaos. Look at human history. Let's bring up, Israel again in Judaism. Let me just finish this thought. They have reformed themselves at many points. And it is okay to find, even within yourself, where your own white man's God, whether that is in the alcohol or tobacco, if you've allowed that to come in to your system, throw it away. No one is against reform if reform is what is necessary.
All right. Oni, any retort to that?
Well, I mean, if she just said, but that's what I'm saying. If she just said that if the white man comes into your system, right, throw him away, whether he is tobacco or whatever. I just explained that the white man came into the ancient, the contemporary systems in Africa, and then so we got to throw him away.
I didn't see that by saying tobacco. I was literally piggybacking off.
We got to throw it away then. That's what I'm saying. I'm just using your words. Just play back the tape. right? Look here. So I want to go to page 357 of the Book of Power. It's a beautiful author. Anyway, so I quote Neferti Yane, right? The prophecy, this is called the prophecy under Nesuchnafru, right? And at one point it says, Eurasians will fall to his sword, okay? Bastards will fall to his flame. Rebels to his wrath. Basically, they are in ancient Africa using their spiritual system, using a prophecy. This is a prophet. Using a prophecy to say, look, we got to go and kill these motherfuckers, right? If you look at, again, in ancient Kemet, you have another. Dang, okay. You have instructions to Merikari, page 456. And this is Keti Yasaba, one of the brilliant people of our past. And what he's telling you is, he's telling his son, lo, the miserable Eurasian. He is wretched because of the place he's in, short of water, bare of wood. The point being that this is a faith that warns you against the Eurasians, that warns you against the Europeans, that warns you against this sort of conflict. And because of that, yes, that is exactly the kind of faith that we need as a people today, because the faiths of today do not have that. And if we're talking about IT, we have to acknowledge that there is a huge practice of Catholicism there that's mixed with that's syncretism and mixed with ancient blah blah blah. But the point being that there's a huge corruption element. And yeah, I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna tell like ISCs. You know what I'm saying? All right, I see my time. She still want to rebut.
Did you have something to say on that?
She can't keep rebutting.
So when Haiti found itself beleaguered and unable to basically, sort of sustain the constant onslaught, unable to gather other Africans to join the cause that, Haiti was hoping and trying to spark revolution everywhere. Literally no one would recognize the independence of Haiti. And in 1860, or around that time, the Vatican made a terrible offer, which I guess, in desperation, they felt the need to accept, which is, we will recognize you if you allow us to bring in our Jesuit priests to open up schools and so on and so forth. Haiti also built the citadel at the time of their strongest, when they were practicing African spirituality. If you ever go to Haiti, you should see it. It is, at the time, the largest structure in that part of the world, and it was built by formerly enslaved Africans. So what happens in Haiti? Basically, Haiti, having its back to its wall, which is what Europeans do, allowed Jesuit missionaries to come into their country and spread Catholicism. That was not what we had at the inception of the Haitian Revolution.
All right. Well, if I may rebut, because she likes rebutting, I do want to say that you wouldn't see. You say what? All right, hold on. All right, let me just briefly say. All right, let me just briefly say, please. Okay. Thank you.
I'm okay.
All right, look.
This your channel, bro.
I should have stopped, right? All right, look. Let me just say this. You wouldn't see that in ancient Egypt. That's all I'm gonna say. Thank you.
All right. So this will be the last question before we go to the audience. Mm-hmm. Amma, you have mentioned that it should be promoted that we go back to our, again, African contemporary spiritual systems. But if our focus, however, globally is Pan-African unity and self-determination, self-actualization as a people, what systems in particular would be the best in promoting such principles for our liberation?
I'm standing by my position, right? So you are creating what I have identified as a false dichotomy. That is, that there's something inherent about having a plurality of expressions that causes division. And I'm saying this is a Eurasian problem. It has not been a problem. This isn't a problem in pre-dynastic Kemet, where people had a diversity of expression. And this is a problematic imposition to put on African peoples who have come to develop a diversity of language and expressions. I would also add that pragmatically, it is a far greater leap. So, for example, I know for a fact from my interactions with most Black people, most continental Africans, they are not even persuaded that we are connected to ancient Egypt. much less, but we are all connected, and this is our source. And they see this as some weird American obsession, just to be fair. And there's a great deal of work that would have to be done first to just establish this affinity so that people can kind of see, no, this isn't just some weird Pan-Africanist American obsession. Here it is related to you. Here is how it is actually a continuation. How what you have is a continuation of it. It seems to me that you are overly burdening yourself by trying to build something that people don't feel connected to. When you have Santeria, Vodou, Ifa being practiced in the diaspora, where you have people who have maintained the system, and we have things to build on. We have actual practitioners throughout the continent that we can tap upon. I don't know that we want to invest in a complete demolition of what has evolved and start from scratch when the work of Kemetic scholars to achieve this goal is far from begun, much less finished.
Oh, with a minute to spare. Okay, all right. Oni, you have any?
I don't even see how that was a. I don't see how that was a question for her. you just threw a softball, but all right. Well, look, all right. As far as the practicality is concerned, right? We have to acknowledge that actually not going off of a united spiritual system and a united way of thinking and a united or a solitary spiritual system, a solitary language, a solitary effort will be actually harder to unite our people than otherwise, because everybody today understands Pan-African nationalism or Pan-Africanism is a pipe dream. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that to unite the continent right now with its 2,000 plus languages, the reason why it's a pipe dream is because of the 2,000 plus languages that are considered esteemable. You understand? Well, when you are the 2,000 plus systems that are considered esteemable, when you instead say, look here, we're going to build because one of the things that will unite people is an educational system. Okay? One of the things that the white man did in order to unite Nigeria, if you say in a sense, is to give it an educational system in one particular language, okay? One particular spiritual system, all right? And because the white man could do it, we could do it twice. You understand? Because we black, we could do it twice, right? But the point being that when we look at what how to unite people, you have to have a school system. That school system can only have so many languages, but it can't have 2,000. Because if you're looking for an advanced course, you're not going to have 2,000 different languages. You're not going to have that course taught in 2,000 different languages. Okay? You got to have it taught in one language. So whereas you don't necessarily need every African person to come on board with one spiritual system, what you will want is the leadership of Africa to come under the same system with the same language and be in contact and in communication with each other. That's what we need. If you're not going to do that, you're not going to have unity. You understand? And if you're not, and so if the goal is unity, then we have to say to ourselves, what can we all do, you know, to truly, for our people to have an educated leadership? What can we do? And we cannot do it with 2,000 different languages. Because even when we go back to the Latin example, they said, even if they went back home and used their own language, even if they went back home and said, oh, I'm going to speak in English, they studied in Latin. They learned Latin. And they studied in Latin. And I don't know why she's saying no, but they did. You know what I mean?
Like the philosophers wrote in their language.
They wrote later. They wrote after they studied.
What year are you talking about?
Exactly. You know, after they had that unity. After they had that. Look, I'm not. Look, the day I look like a European historian is the day that Europeans look African. But I know I'm not gonna tell you no year. What I'm telling you is that they went through their Latin phase. We gotta go through our Kemetic phase. How's that sound? All right.
All right. You don't gotta yell. All right. So the audience, we have finished our questions and for this portion of the debate. And now we're going to the audience chat. So for the first question, we have Raymond Ingram. How can any African spiritual system unite us as a people when those African/Black scholars that practice all these African spiritual systems are warring against each other?
Okay. He said ancient? How can any Africans... Oh, no. I said, yeah. Okay, that's probably for Amma, right? Oh, I would say, look. I mean, wait, actually, you're the moderator. Tell us who's going to speak. Who's going to address it first?
Since you talking, go ahead, man.
All right. So, yeah, I mean, that's an obvious point. You can't have... Like, for instance, I saw that the Nuer and the Dinka, right? They regard it... Like, it's sacred for them. Like I said, when it comes to Yuruku, it's sacred for them to villainize the other. You know, in different, or if you look at Nigeria with the Fulani and the let's say the Yoruba, right? They have different economic systems, and because of those different economic systems, they have different spiritual systems, and because of those different spiritual systems, they are at war with each other. You know, if a Fulani herdsman comes through, you know, the people who might be more the people who are pastoralists might be fighting the agriculturalists based off of that, but it's deep and ingrained into their spiritual system. You know, you cannot have that unity because the economic systems and the so on and so forth are not going to be there. What we have to do is we have to impose a new one that's based off of a rediscovered spiritual system that we already had to unite our people, but we can't do it with what's going on right now. But I don't know how much time we have, so I'm just going to see right now.
This is just going from the hip. All right, Amma.
Sure. So nobody's warring against each other. I'm certainly not warring against Tony right now. We are having a dialogue, and I think the question was not so much how are we going to do these systems, but how are we going to do it when these scholars are warring against each other. And I would say that that's not happening. Again, the idea that in order for human beings to unite, they must always agree and do everything exactly the same way is simply unrealistic, and it's not happening anywhere in the world, not with the people who are in power now. And so asking all of us to do the exact same thing the exact same way is something that I promise you the average African will greatly rebel against. It's not a pragmatic solution. As for the diversity of language and educational system, we know some common European language. There are about 200 languages spoken throughout the European continent, just here, which is a lot smaller, by about, population-wise, I believe about a third of the African population. And so some of those languages become official languages, and some of those become spoken languages. I was trying to find it on my computer, and unfortunately I could not. A while ago, I did a tally of commonly spoken African languages, and equally, the top 20 languages absorb the overwhelming majority of the continent. And then if you do the top 50, you've almost got everybody covered. But we have some languages that are spoken by 100,000 people in a continent of 1 billion people. Those are not going to be the languages of our education. They're not going to be how we write our textbook, unfortunately, because too few people speak them. But Europeans don't speak one language. They write books in French, they write books in German, they write books in English. And I would hate to see the great diversity that Africans have produced through our creativity, whether it's in spiritual practices or in linguistic expression, be established. I also think if you think there is pushback because, this person or that person, you will certainly get it if you try to impose a uniform identity. And where you have problems like Fulani herdsmen, they're not practicing African spiritual system. They're practicing a whole foreign invader religion with a history of being violent on the continent.
Okay. What I could say to that, before you said that Fulani thing, you said something else. What I could say to that is
educational diversity, I think I said.
You said, yeah, the languages. Yeah, so here's
diversity,
the thing.
And you have like.
Here's the thing about the languages thing that we have to understand that in Africa right now there are no higher education institutions in an indigenous African language. None. Zero. No African person is studying, let's say, chemistry in an indigenous in an institution that is that speaks an indigenous language. So that's to say that because of this, even though we might say, oh well, yeah, there's 50, oh, it's not 2,000, it's 50, so on and so forth. We're not even doing it right now because of the diversity. And so what we have to ask ourselves is that when we go and do it, how many languages are we going to do it in? Is that even practical for us to do it in 50 languages? Is it practical to build a university that caters to 50 different languages? No.
It's possible to build 50 universities throughout the continent that cater to 50 languages.
You said 50, yeah, but then how are they going to coordinate with each other?
Through translation and the way everybody else is doing it.
As opposed to
continent, where are people speaking just one language? Which continent?
Well, all right. Well, in North America, with the exception of Mexico, they speak in one language. And North America,
they speak French in Canada as well.
In like one city, I believe.
No, actually in a whole province. Also, America is unique in that they came in and one group of people killed a whole bunch of people, right? So where things have happened more organically, like in Europe, where people settled and developed, you have diversity.
Who is the global superpower?
Asia, you have diversity.
There are two global superpowers, or three global superpowers, right? You know, in recent times. One is the United States. They speak English. One is Russia. They speak Russian. One is Chinese. One is China. They speak Mandarin. They don't speak, China has a whole bunch of languages too. They speak Mandarin. That's it.
Okay, so
in Russia,
taking my point that you can have an official language
Soviet Union.
And you can have a national language. So there's a difference between a national language and a continental language. You are trying to impose not only a uniform spirituality on the continent, but apparently a uniform language. That is going to be met with extreme resistance.
If we, and this is important for everybody to know, that if we do establish a Pan-African nation, we should want the borders to be the continent. I mean, Australia does it. In fact, Australia is a good example of a continent
that destroyed a whole group of indigenous people. That is not who we are, and we're not going to.
Well, I didn't say we were going to do that. I just said that we were going to go to schools.
This is great, but you do know we have other questions, guys. All right.
You the moderator?
No. We have one from, and please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name, Atrazor Tilzu.
Oh, yeah.
Do we go into these religions and try to rewrite them? And since they serve so many of us, is this a practical strategy?
Exactly.
I'm not the one who's suggesting we jettison them. He brought up instances where they need to be reformed. So one of the people that I follow is Professor
Is she free for you?
Who is an African American, or he likes to call himself African American, anti-American, who lives in Ghana, practices contemporary African spiritual system, and critiques the use of schnapps. So you can critique the use of anything. And having in a previous life been a Christian, this is not unique to African spiritual systems. Christianity has reformed and re-reformed and re-reformed. Catholicism itself has reformed and reformed and re-reformed. What Oni has yet to answer for us is what is it about this Kemetic system that we're supposed to believe is so incorruptible, which, by the way, no one's really practicing today. So something happened that caused it to fall apart, that if we should adopt it, we would never see human frailty being introduced. That seems to me grossly unrealistic, and I don't know that we should jettison the things that we have simply because they're subject to human frailty, because humans are frail.
Okay, so about Waset. So the thing about Waset and the study of Waset is that they themselves, they kept an extensive record, and they kept with the record. And they kept with the ideology, the philosophy within those records. So that is the reason why that right there would be the purer and less corruptible aspect of our people. It's because they
wrote it down?
Not just because they wrote it down, but they did write it down, definitely. You know, so it's almost like it's no longer subject to human frailty. You know, because it is as you know, if we spoke about this in the Urugu discussion, but it is because it has this it's outside of us as humans. It's kind of like if you will, for the Americans, you know, they have this constitution that they're not changing, and because they're not changing it, it's still the same constitution. Now, obviously, that is a flawed. You know, the constitution is flawed. It's a white example. It's whatever. But there's a difference between having that sort of a system and having what we have today in the contemporaries, which might just be more subject to, oh, well, you know, schnapps tastes good, so I'm going to say that. You know, so schnapps tastes good, so I'm going to go along with it. You know what I mean? So that's the big difference. And they were, of course, anti-African. They're anti-Eurasians, unlike a lot of the belief systems of today. And that's also another flaw with that, because as soon as you start reforming them, if you will, you begin to realize that you need a premise of what you're reforming them to. And if you're just going to change this and that, though, and so forth, you're going to realize that eventually you're going to be demanding a uniformity, and that uniformity is going to be something that you see in the ancient, as the ancient African spiritual system, which is what we have already done in the ancient world, and we're just revisiting. It's called Sankofa, or it's even called Ma'at. That's my answer to that.
All right. I have some more questions from Mathis. So one in particular that I think it's pretty similar to some of the questions we had during the main debate was, do we identify the essentials of our ancient African systems and try to proselytize within each or these religions surreptitiously?
Okay. So I think he's saying strategically, and that's why I say, look, one thing that we have to do, because again, if we're going to form institutions on the continent, form nationalist institutions on the continent, we're going to run into the issue of proselytizing already. Because if you're in a professorship, educational environment, you're already proselytizing your belief system, regardless of whether or not you're teaching something completely distinct. If you're teaching engineering, you're teaching programming, you're already proselytizing your belief system, whether you like to admit it or not. And because of that, instead of dilly-dallying and playing around with it, we should just be direct with it. We're building institutions on the continent of Africa. We have to say, look, you know what? This is our faith. This is what every other people are doing. And even though I might say, hey, well, we don't see that in unity, blah, blah, blah. We understand that the Catholics, I should give the IT example. The Catholics came up as a Catholic front. Okay? They came up as a Catholic front. And that's how they were so effective in IT. They didn't say, oh, well, you know what, there was this version, that version. No, they did that, and that's how they were able to convert so many people in IT towards that faith. We have to say to ourselves, like I said, if the white man could do it, we could do it twice.
So, what was I going to say? Proselytizing. I think, rather than have a debate about this, although I did agree to have a debate, I think what needs to happen is that the people who are practicing Kemetic spirituality have quite a bit of work cut, because they have to start doing some work in terms of getting adherents, which people are doing, not scholars and professors who are proselytizing an institution, but Babalawos and other spiritual practitioners on the continent, off the continent, are already have adherents that people are attached to and are emotionally invested in. And so my main contention is one of pragmatism, which is I don't know how you're going to make that leap when people already don't feel connected to this past. But I want to kind of review something we touched on earlier, which is how did Europeans connect with their antiquity? Scholars did study antiquity, although when the writers of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment wrote, they wrote in their vernacular language. But yes, they were schooled in Latin and in Greek. It was a small minority. If the debate here were, should we have a minority of scholars who are thoroughly familiar with ancient Kemetic traditions, history, culture, and language, I would concede that point readily. I don't know that we shouldn't have that, and that would be beneficial, and it would inform our practice now. That's not what's on the table. What's on the table is that we throw out what we have now, especially when we haven't even had that core group of scholars who are doing the work. But lastly, he brought up the question of Catholicism. There is a hegemonic way in which Europeans have approached the world. Right? So he brought up the example of Australia, he brought up the example of America. What you have are people who go up, commit genocide, enforce their will upon everybody. The Catholic Church terrorized the continent for a very long time until Europeans had to rebel and say enough of this, and now they really aren't that interested in Catholicism or any Christianity as a result of the behavior that we saw from Europeans. That isn't us, and we can see that in the history of how we, even when we weren't under duress, formed nations. You have like African kings giving their blessing to another group of people to go over there and settle. And when you adopt, when you have your next coronation, I'll acknowledge your king because we are brothers and we are, related peoples without feeling the need to sort of dominate that other group of people. And that's one of the reasons. I agree with Oni that another reason was, things that happened that caused all of us to scatter. One of the reasons we have this diversity is we're not cool with letting somebody do their thing. And I don't know that we should adopt this hegemonic European way of imposing uniformity on the world. It is not us.
All right. So I want to say, first off, if somebody says, it's a lot of work to be done, I want to just quote on the cover of my book, Ptah Htp once again. He says, "Copy your forefathers, for work is carried out through knowledge." So of course, Ptah Htp, go back to ancient Egypt. He says, look, yeah, we're gonna do some work. What work is what we're supposed to be doing. That's the only thing we're supposed to be doing. As far as whether we want to genocide people, no, we're not. I never said let's go kill some people. I never said that, right? But as far as the intellectuals studying, we have to understand that is exactly what unity means. You understand? What unity means is not necessarily everybody got to change. Everybody and mama got to change. Everybody and mama don't got to change. The white man, when he came and he, like right now, a lot of Africa is Christian or Muslim, right? The white man did not come into Africa and make a bunch of converts. He instead provided education to young kids. In fact, I'm gonna just told you what happened in Haiti. He provided education to a bunch of young kids, and those kids grew up and replaced the former generation. That's what happens. And I'm not saying, come again?
That's not only what happened.
That's not only what happened.
A situation of distress and then made you need it.
Look,
it may not be, outright murder, but
I want to say this.
Very condition that you have to submit to.
I want to say this. Africa's in a situation of distress right now. We don't gotta create it. Africa's in a situation of distress right now. And it's only upon and if we are to go into Africa to transform it, we have to, as the people who are interested in liberating our own people, right? In transforming this world, we have to go in and say, oh, you know what? We have a program for our people to lift them up out of this dreary condition, right? But that does not mean that we, as the people who want to liberate, have to also learn 2,000 languages to do it. Okay? And we have to write this program in 2,000 languages and have to, because we're going to create a division right there. I want to say also on this note, the blessing to divide that Amma was pointing out, that's the blessing to be conquered. That's all it is. That's what it was.
All right. Did you want to say anything, or did you want to go to the next question?
No, Amma, did you want to say anything?
No, not to that. Let's take another question.
Okay.
We only have about 11 minutes, and we got it. I assume we're doing some kind of closing statement.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the language discussion can be a whole other debate itself, honestly. But I know I'm strapped for time, so let me look through.
Yeah, try to find the best one. I'm joking.
So was there another question you wanted to?
Yeah, there's some other questions. I just want to make sure that nothing's like getting rehashed for some of the questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think I'll go with this one. So this is an interesting point. I started to bring up. Christianity was useful for Nat Turner's revolution. Does this commend Christianity to us?
Does this commend Christianity to us? Okay. Well, I mean, obviously, I would say no.
Oh, yeah, we get you. Yeah.
But I guess I'm what do you say about because Christianity helped Nat Turner? Is it good?
Not particularly, and also, I mean, yes, it inspired him to rebel, but ultimately the balance of negativity, and since this isn't this debate, I would say far outweighs that one moment in history in which a couple white people were killed, and then it stopped.
Okay. That's one way of putting it. All right, so, all right, moderator, what's next?
All right. And I think the last one, this is still language related, but Trigger Happy 262 Plus, interesting name. Well, I would say lingua franca should be Kiswahili, as others have suggested. Would you say that, you all?
Would you say that lingua franca? Okay.
So I would say for the purposes of having an African Union, I do not believe we should have a continental African nation, but that is another debate. The African Union, which would be a union of nation, a functional union of nation. You can call it something different if you don't like the current composition. Nobody should love the current composition. That can be the language. I fully support that. But I'm going to say when you go somewhere in Accra, for example, I would hope that the language of education would be Twi and that Swahili should be taught in school as a second language. In elementary school, I'm an advocate of mother tongue education. As much as possible, let us teach children and let us preserve the diversity of African languages that we have. We're not going to engage in European-style hegemonic domination.
So, what I would say to that is, of course, you have to have a national language. You have to have a national school system. You have to have and it has to be above the local level. I do also agree in preserving local languages, but I also understand that if we are to be a technologically supreme people, a people who can actually fight against our opponents, then we have to make the effort to, in fact, be that sort of that people who are united in a particular language. And yes, I would add Swahili if we cannot do Madu Nature. I would add Swahili, yes, or a mix of it. All right, thank you so much. What's next, moderator?
All right. I think we can go ahead and go into the closing remarks.
Okay.
So, since you've been talking so much, would you like to go first?
No, I think since you have the first word, I want the last one.
Oh, okay. Let's switch it around then. Go ahead, Owen.
Man, I wanted the first and the last word. All right. I was trying to trick you throughout. All right. So what I would say is that I hope everybody understands that the theme of the question was. Or the theme that I was going for was African spirituality is a necessary tool for the unity of Africa. I want you to understand that insofar as religion or spiritual systems are a sacralization of a nationalistic ideology, that we have to observe what the spiritual systems of today are doing and realize that because they are sacralizing foreign things, and they're sacralizing things that are corrupted or deeply corrupted and deeply corruptible, that we have to go back to where we had a pure statement of African spirituality, and that would be in Waset, because, and we know this because Waset has a tradition of looking back at what would be a pure expression of Africa and fighting for Africa and fighting for that gender balance that we don't even see that much in Africa today. So I want to say in closing that we have to realize not only the fundamentals of spirituality, and I did want to go a little bit deeper into what sacralizing and what sacredness really means, but truly in the sense of handling disputes and in the sense of handling conversations, what we can do if we have a singular spiritual system, that we can handle those disputes, handle our ethics and our morals much more clearly, much more uniformly. And I mean, that's what I would say, and that's why I would say that this ancient spiritual system would be the most beneficial one for us as a people. Thank you so much for everybody. And of course, thank you, Ama, and of course, Azikiwe.
All right, well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure. I actually had a good deal of fun in our conversation. I'm going to start with a Kemetic idea, the importance of knowing yourself. We not only know ourselves from what we are now, but I think we can look at a good deal of our history and know that who we have, given what we know about ourselves, given what we know about our diversity, given what we know even about our own tendency to say, please go ahead, do your thing over there. What we have to do is figure out how to form coalitions that are wise, coalitions that work, without ceasing to be ourselves. It reminds me of a quote from Okodali that I thought was very profound, which is, we need to figure out how to be sun people, while we simultaneously recognize that there are ice people on Earth. But it doesn't mean that we become them. And I think any kind of totalitarian uniformity that sort of flattens the continent into one undifferentiated thing would not be the best of ourselves. I also think, and this is an important point, that this is unpragmatic. We simply have a good deal of people, especially people on the continent, for whom this conversation just seems like an odd thing that the American Pan-Africanists are doing. And while I think that they should be disabused of that idea, I do think it's a bit of an academic exercise. And the academic exercise would need to do a lot more work to filter into the popular consciousness before we can really talk about it as a realistic program for us. Realistically, what we have now is something that I'm very pleased to witness, because I don't know that in 10 or 20 years ago I thought I would have seen it, which is great interest. Babalawos with YouTube channels and people across the continent sharing ideas and talking about how they're reconnecting to their roots. And I think that needs to be promoted and celebrated, because that's where we are and that's where we have the most possibility. And I want to talk about this idea of corruption and corruptibility, because I think that that's really a key point to Oni's argument. These religions are corrupted. I wouldn't even deny that. Seems to me that it would be shameful to point to the human tendency to be corrupted, which is why I did not even bother to do any kind of investigation into in what way was the event corrupted. I operate with what I think is a reasonable assumption. Humans are subject to frailty and corruptibility, and there was probably some, but I have no interest in casting aspersions on our ancient ancestors any more than I have on casting aspersions at our most recent. One of the things I find beautiful and very true about African spirituality is this statement from the Yoruba tradition. There's a little bit of evil in the good, and there's a little bit of good in the evil. This idea that we exist in this tension on earth in which perhaps there is this bad thing, but if you look at it this way, from this perspective, there's a way that it can benefit at least somebody, but also like that we don't live in this very Western cosmic dualism of black and white, in which good and evil do not coexist. Simply, it's foreign to us, or at least as far as I know, foreign to us now. And I have not heard anything other than the fact that the Kemetic tradition wrote things down that would suggest that they had somehow escaped the imperfections of humanity. And it doesn't seem to me enough reason to jettison the very beautiful diversity that we have grown over time. That's not, jettisoning them would not be a necessity in order to bring about diversity. I mean, in order to bring about unity. Apologies for the wrong use of word, and I think that's my last thought. So thank you very much for having me.
All right, family. Moderator, you got anything else to say?
Well, this was a very fruitful conversation and fruitful debate. Good interaction from the audience and from each other, and I like how you guys kept it respectful amongst each other. Thank you for coming. You know, it's been nice. Thank you for allowing me to moderate my questions and what have you. Go ahead, bro.
Yeah, you did a great job, you know, and thank you, Amma, for coming through. I would have went a little deeper, obviously. I could have, if only, you know. But, yeah, that was fun.
If it was a fifth, I'll be drunk, bro.
You said what?
If it was a fifth, I'll be drunk, so don't worry about
it. If it was a fifth? I don't know.
All
right. But, all right, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Thank you for tuning in. This was a debate. Hopefully, y'all could, you know, make sure you hashtag only one day. I'm joking. All right. Anyway, but thanks so much, everybody, for listening. And until the next time, obviously, if you want to challenge me or if you want to challenge Amma, you know, why not, right? You know, just let us know. Hit us up. But otherwise, thanks so much. Make sure you subscribe. Tune into the rest of KWAZ Radio. And I'll chat with you all much later. I'm going to end the stream. Shem Yam Hotep.